This video is made possible by HelloFresh. Go to HelloFresh.com and use the code RealLifeLore14 to get 14 free meals, including free shipping. The colossal population of China is a concept that's difficult for Westerners to understand. With a population that's nearing 1.4 billion people, there are more people who live in China than in that's nearing 1.4 billion people. There are more people who live in China than in the entire continents of Europe, North America, and Australia all combined. Nearly 18% of the entire human population is Chinese, while China itself is the world's third largest country by territory. But despite this titanic population and this enormous territory, more than half of China's land is almost empty. If you draw a diagonal line across the country from the frozen town of Heihe in the northeast across to tropical Tengchong in the southwest, you will find that an overwhelming 94% of China's 1.4 billion people live to the east of this line, on only 43% of China's land, while only a mere 6% of China's population lives to the west of the line, on 57% of the land. China's eastern half is therefore home to more than 1.3 billion people with a population density that's similar to Massachusetts throughout, while the western half is only home to 84 million people with a population density that's more similar to Kansas throughout. The difference between these two halves of China is even more abundantly apparent from space, where you can see the bright, glittering lights of civilization across the east, opposed by near complete darkness and emptiness across the west. So, almost like America in the 19th century, 21st century China has a vast, undeveloped, and sparsely populated western half. But unlike America, China's western problem has remained unsolved and relatively unsettled for thousands of years now. Nearly a century ago, back in 1935, a man named Hu Huanyang drew this map with this line across China, published in the Chinese Journal of Geography. Hu discovered that 96% of the Chinese population lived to the east of his line, while only 4% lived to the west of it. At the time, China's population was only a third of what it is today, with about 500 million people, and her territory was significantly larger with the inclusion of Mongolia. In the nearly century since that map was drawn, China has lost Mongolia. Her population has skyrocketed nearly 3 times from there to 1.4 billion, and she has seen the incredible chaos and upheavals of the Japanese invasion, communism, and the economic miracle that saw the nation's GDP per capita increase 17 times in a mere 4 decades that enabled China to soar into becoming the world's second largest global economy. And yet, despite all of that change, China's population imbalance between East and West has remained pretty much constant throughout. And it's been constant for thousands of years even before then, and nobody has ever been able to solve it. So why has this demographic problem existed throughout time? Well, there's many reasons why, but let's take a look at China's geography first. The easy answer is to simply say that the land east of the Hu Line is simply better suited for civilization and for sustaining larger populations. Because it is. You've got vast open plains in the north that are flat, warm, receive tons of rainfall, and are easy to farm and develop, with 2 of Earth's largest rivers flowing across them. And you've got warm, gentle, rolling plains hills in the south that receive even more rainfall than the north does. Directly adjacent to these plains are a nearly unbroken chain of mountains that run completely north to south, save for a very tiny corridor here along the Yangtze River that leads into the Sichuan Basin, a huge, hidden, flat field that's completely surrounded by mountains on all sides and separated by them from the rest of China's flat, plain lands. Unsurprisingly, when looking at a side-by-side map of China's terrain and China's population density, the flatlands of the north, south, and the Sichuan Basin in the center are where nearly the entirety of China's population resides, because flat plains and basins are where it's naturally the easiest to build farms, develop cities, and grow populations on that eventually evolve into civilizations, kingdoms, and empires. The simple reality is that the plains and flat lands to the east of the line are some of the greatest and richest agricultural land that's found anywhere on the planet, while the land to the west of the line is literally the most inhospitable and hostile environment found anywhere on the planet outside of Antarctica or Greenland. In some places, this area is even more hostile to human life than the Sahara Desert. The land here is entirely covered with high mountains and vast dry deserts, which aren't exactly the most fruitful lands for developing civilization upon to begin with, but their environments are even worse than what it seems. The massive Himalayas in the south are the highest mountain chain in the world, and they cast a literal shadow that extends well across the Tibetan Plateau, Gobi, and Taklamakan deserts that blocks all of these regions from receiving the substantial amounts of rainfall that China's east receives. Air with clouds full of rain bring wet monsoons from the Indian Ocean that dump enormous amounts of water across India, Bangladesh, and Myanmar, but the high mountains of the Himalayas block these clouds from climbing above and beyond them like a harsh weather border wall. Thus, rainfall rarely ever gets through, and it makes the areas beyond some of the driest found anywhere on the planet, which makes traditional agriculture across the plateau and the deserts impossible. And if it wasn't for the lack of rainfall making civilization impossible, it would be the temperatures. The long rain shadow cast by the Himalayas is what created both the Taklamakan and Gobi deserts, but their locations so close to Siberia leads to wild temperature variations. Harsh, cold winds blowing in from the Arctic can send temperatures in the deserts during wintertime plunging to as low as -40 Celsius. And during the summertime, they can skyrocket up to as high as 45 Celsius. Temperatures within the deserts can literally change by as much as 35 degrees Celsius within just a single 24-hour period. And to make matters even worse, the deserts are expanding. Just like the nomadic conquerors who have come roaring out from these lands for thousands of years to conquer and pillage China's agricultural land, the sands of the deserts themselves are now taking their own turn at a rate of nearly 3,600 square kilometers every single year. What that means is that roughly every decade, the sands of the Gobi alone are conquering nearly 1 Taiwan worth of agricultural land from China. The nearby Taklamakan Desert is located within an area known as the Tarim Basin, with brutal temperatures during both summer and winter, while also being almost entirely absent of water and surrounded by high mountains on all sides. This region is not only incredibly difficult to reach, but it's incredibly difficult to survive in once you even get there. As a result, the Tarim Basin is believed to have been the final place on the entire Asian continent that was settled by humans, potentially only as recently as about 1800 BCE, many centuries after the ancient Egyptians constructed the Great Pyramid at Giza. As a result of this terrible geography, the lands west of the Hu Line within China have pretty much always been essentially a barren wasteland hostile to nearly all human life that's never been able to support much more than nomadic herders, while the land east of the line became the birthplace and cradle of Chinese civilization. And where there are people, more will follow and follow throughout time. So that's the reason why throughout the eons, China's confounding population disparity has persisted. But all of that kinda begs another question. If more than half of China's land is so worthless, why does China even control all of it in the first place? The answer is largely because the land isn't really so worthless as it may seem from only looking at one single kind of map. To start with, Tibet might only have a population of less than 4 million people, but it's not the people that's important here to China, it's the water and the location. Owing to the high elevation that towers above the rest of the world, Tibet is home to tens of thousands of glaciers that collectively contain the world's third largest storage site of fresh water after Antarctica and Greenland. This has led many to label Tibet as the third pole of the Earth. But it's not just glaciers. Tibet is also referred to as the water tower of Asia because many of the world's largest rivers begin across the plateau, including both the Yellow